We are back, Bears fans. Bear Era is back with you after a bit of a hiatus after the season. In fact, the last time we talked to you, Ben Johnson wasn't even the coach yet. So we get to catch up on lots of news. Ciaran, how are you? You've got some of your own news.
Yeah, absolutely. There's not been a lot happening, has there been, since we've been talking? No,
Nothing.
it's no nothing. Loads been going on with the Bears. Obviously, a lot personally as well in terms of my other show. In terms of my when I started the Irish Bears Network, Irish Bears Show, whatever it is, will be slightly changing a little bit because a big focus of my podcasting life will be geared towards Bear Era, and you'll still see me talking a little bit on the other channel and kind of live streams when craziness happens maybe, and then some videos and in terms of like draft prospects and things that can affect the Bears. But these longer forms of podcasting is with my good friend EJ here, and that's what it's going to be a lot of fun this season. I can't wait to cover the Bears because, as we just said, a lot of stuff has happened. So there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah, a little bit. And we would be remiss, of course, if we didn't start the show off talking about the life of Virginia McCaskey, matriarch of the Bears, who also passed away in the interim since we've been with you. Absolute rock, legend of the league, one of the few connections to the quote unquote original NFL who was surviving. Is survived by many kids, many more grandkids, lots of whom are involved with family franchise as well. There's been a lot of questions about whether or not that'll cause some sort of shift in ownership. Initial reactions from the family are no. Eventually we shall see. Bears are supposed to break ground on a stadium this year as well. So lots of changes coming for the Bears, but we didn't want to get into a show without, a tip of the cap at the very least to Virginia McCaskey for being the matriarch of this franchise for all of our lifetimes and well beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a whirlwind of a week where we found out that obviously the sad news of Virginia passing away. I was happy to see that the vast majority of Bears fans were very respectful in terms of that, because in this football sphere, it's very difficult to get that to happen. But again, it just shows that when this fan base does come together and galvanizes behind something, it's nice to see. I saw a lot of people saying put her initials on the jersey for this year and do something special, which I do think that they should do something, which I would be very surprised if they don't. But yeah, it was a sad week with Virginia obviously passing away. We also found out that Dick Duran passed away. It's been a tough week for the franchise when we've gone through probably about a 3 or 4 week period of a lot of positivity, and again, a lot of thoughts and prayers with the ownership at the moment, in terms of when we talk about kind of George and we talk about the rest of the family. People kind of aren't the biggest fans of the McCaskey family, but what she was able to do within the NFL sphere when she wasn't expecting to be an owner is very, very good. And you just have to kind of tip your cap to what she was able to do to kind of change the landscape of the NFL at that time.
Yeah, for sure. A worthwhile contribution and then some. So pivoting to happier news, as we mentioned, Ben Johnson was not the coach of the Bears last time. I don't know if you remember where you were when you heard the news specifically. I do. I was working at my computer. It popped up, and I don't know about you. I just sat there for a minute because of all the things that we talked about towards the end of the season and really through the last half of the season as we were talking about it on Bear Era. We just didn't expect the best thing to happen. And I think a lot of Bears fans are in the same boat. We have been conditioned that the best possible option is not the one that will end up in a Bears uniform or under a Bears hat or on the sideline or anything else. And so when it popped up, I literally was kind of, gobsmacked for a second. I just sat there and I was like, is this real? And I looked at the source. I was like, nope, this is definitely real. And then I just sort of settled back in my chair and was like, holy crap. Like, the one thing that could give me the most possible hope about this franchise moving forward in many terms in terms of them being functional on offense, in terms of Caleb's futures being maximized. All those things really hinged on Ben Johnson. And there were various versions with lesser impact throughout, other folks in the coaching search, but there was nobody like Ben. Ben was the clear leader. And I really didn't think that Chicago would end up with him for multiple reasons. There's lots of smoke. Then they did. And I just kind of sat there and went, oh, so when we started this whole thing and we said it's a new era, and then we suffered through last season, we weren't wrong. We were just early.
Yeah, sometimes it's good to be early. So it was, that week was a very interesting one for me, because I just remember kind of taking in all the information that was coming from various different sources. There was some people that were more confident on the Ben Johnson and the Bears links. Others were kind of very adamant in terms of, oh, it doesn't look like this is happening. I remember doing different shows, different videos of, you'd have one person saying one thing, another person saying another. And I was like, there was the emotional side of my brain and the logical side of my brain that was fighting with each other that week. The emotional side was like, oh, God damn it, he's a Raider. And then the logical side is like, that doesn't make sense. Like, the teams that he has rejected in the past, I'm like, that doesn't make sense that he goes there. And I do remember it vividly. It was the Sunday. And I said this before, that I remember going for a walk with my son, and I just thought of it at the end. I'm like, I have a sneaky feeling that maybe they will actually change, and maybe they will get this done. And then when it happened, I think I arrived home from work for about like 15 minutes, was in the middle of like cooking dinner, and then all the notifications happened, and I don't know what dinner turned out to be like because I was so distracted.
Yeah, a few burned pots.
Yeah.
Our good friend Bill Zimmerman did an interview with Rick Smith, who's Ben Johnson's agent. And one of the things Rick Smith said in that interview was, the Bears have changed. And I think that's really important. It's an important turning point that a lot of Bears fans might not mark as such. But for an agent, agents haven't necessarily, the wide array of agents haven't necessarily had the best experience with the Bears. Certain agents have, of course. But for him to come out and say, this is a changed organization, and I give Kevin Warren credit for that. He made that link very directly. They are different, and it is because of Kevin Warren, which is what I think a lot of us were hoping for when Kevin Warren's position was created, when he was hired for it. And to have an agent come out and say that, and again, to have it be the agent of the hottest coaching prospect in the last couple of years, not just this year, who very solidly came into this negotiation and said, we want this job, which is a very different footing to enter a negotiation with the Bears on. And, in terms of all the Raiders smoke, it became very clear that, as often happens in these things, the coach and his agent ended up using the Raiders to leverage the Bears, not the other way around. And of course, us all being Bears fans and having been through the wars of previous coaching hires, we're like, oh, he's just, using the Bears to jack up the Raiders price. And it was the other way around, which is kind of a stunning turn of events for folks that don't follow those goings on in the league. But the end result is Ben Johnson is the coach of the Bears, as weird as it is to say that, as awesome as it is to say that. And what we're going to do is break down, now that the staff is fully deployed, which is pretty darn cool. They hired one more, I'm assuming, offensive line assistant from Oregon State today, because somebody called me up and said, hey, didn't you go to the OSU Pro Day the last couple of days? Do you know this guy? And yeah, he's the new O-line coach. I said, no, they hired their O-line coach. He's from Tulane. He's probably an assistant, but he's worked with a couple of offensive linemen now. I mean, Talisi Fuaga came out last year, who was the big one out of Oregon State. But we just talked to Joshua Gray, who's the center this year, who was at Shrine. I like Josh very much as a player. So nice history for him as well. But we have the advantage, since we're not on every day, of waiting for this whole coaching staff to be fleshed out and kind of picking and choosing our favorites, some of the highlights that we think are real good gets, quite frankly. And we're going to do that. We're going to do two apiece, and then we're going to open it up for everybody's questions. But you want to go first, Ciaran? Pick your favorite hire from. We're going to skip over Ben. We've talked about Ben a lot, but folks, Ben has been able to attract to Chicago with him.
Yeah, I think it's an important step. We said when we kind of laid out a foundation of whoever the head coach was going to be, one of the key things we mentioned was they have to get the staff right.
Yes.
And by looking at the lists that when I kind of put together like different trackers and stuff like that of the coaches that have come together, and the great thing about this is we're doing 2 coaches each year, and it was actually difficult to pick which coaches to do.
Yeah.
I would be remiss without doing kind of what I said at the start of this whole process, that if you do get that young offensive guy, the defensive coordinator has to be probably the perfect hire. And Ben Johnson, with that in mind, tick. I like it. Dennis Allen is it's the type of defensive coordinator I like because he's aggressive and he wants to win and he's not happy to settle when the defense is on the field. And it's something that I really like. There's a couple of parts of this that I was very positive with. He's probably not leaving you to be a head coach somewhere, which is great. So that is a good one, that he's been a head coach twice. It's very unlikely that he'll get to be one a third time around. He is a much better defensive coordinator than he is a head coach, but also it is important that he was a head coach because you have a first time head coach. And sometimes it's when guys make mistakes as the head guy, they have to kind of self-evaluate and be like, this is what needs to be done. These are the different steps. This is how much it's going to pull you away from doing what you want to do on the offensive side of the football. And I think that was really important. I kind of linked it back to when Sean McVay took over for the LA Rams, and it's changed since, but those first 2 years for when he first started with Wade Phillips, he was basically take care of the defense and I'll focus over here on the offense. And you can do that in terms of you can trust Dennis Allen to take care of that defense and you can feel pretty good about it. It's very similar, I think, to the first season when Matt Nagy was with the Bears, that he could basically rely on Vic Fangio to do whatever with the defense. And that's what I like about Dennis Allen, that you can trust him. You can trust what he's kind of bringing to the table in terms of the success. Like you can look at the numbers, you can look at the statistical analysis of his defenses, and they're, for the past couple of seasons, they've always been very highly ranked in some of the most important categories. But the key thing that I like about it is the one thing that infuriated me with the Eberflus defense, and I know it's kind of stems from what we saw in Lovie Smith, the whole bend but don't break. But at the end of games, like, I'd much rather lose a game because my defensive coordinator is being aggressive and guys are trying to make plays versus guys stepping off and allowing a team to beat you. And that's what I like. You're going to see more of the kind of like Spags type thing with the Chiefs, where he's going to come up with something to try and win you a game rather than being like, oh, I'm afraid I don't want to lose this game. Like, those are the types of those are the types of coaches I like. When people talk about kind of what are we getting in Dennis Allen, if you like Aaron Glenn and what he was able to bring with the Detroit Lions, where did he come from? He came from that same tree. So you're going to see an aggressive approach, which actually I think fits a lot of the players on the defense for the Bears. So I think it's a really good fit. And I actually don't think I don't think Ben Johnson could have picked a better coach that would be available to add. And it was very clear that he knew that this was going to be his guy for a very long time, because it seems like they have been talking for months that if he was going to take a job, would he be willing to come with him? The fact that Ben Johnson gets hired and then maybe 2 hours later Adam Schefter kind of leaks out that that's the guy, they knew that was the linkage for a while. And I think that's why we heard the little rumors that Ben Johnson knows who is coming with him on staff. I think he probably knew Dennis Allen was coming with him and then maybe one or two of the Detroit guys. But yeah, I think top-notch hire at the defensive coordinator and was probably one of his most important hires.
Fully agree about the importance of the hire. Also really like what you said about the fit with a bunch of existing defensive players. Whenever you have a coaching staff change, regime change, lots of players from the previous regime typically don't make it. And it is important to limit that number by matching when you can coaching style with players you have in-house, because you can't turn over an entire roster. Turnover is prevalent after new coaching arrives in town. It always happens to a different degree, but it always happens. And there are a lot of players I think are hand in glove fits for what Dennis Allen likes to do, especially in the secondary. I think Jalen Johnson is going to be extremely thrilled with how he is used and valued in this particular defense. If you look at Dennis Allen's defenses that he's run in New Orleans, he's had that type of corner and used them aggressively. He also is pretty creative. I like the Spags link you brought up with how he will play safeties as robbers, nickels, stars, whatever. And Kyler Gordon is got to be thrilled out of his mind, because he is not going to be pigeonholed as one thing or another. He's going to be used as a multi-role piece. He has that ability. We've seen that going forward, going backward. And I think Dennis Allen's probably really excited about working with both of those guys. The defensive line, I think we're going to see an influx of talent there, which will give him sort of more rounds in the chamber for that. And we'll see how that works out. But very important hire for him. Lined up, I'm not going to say great for Dennis Allen given his exit from New Orleans, but lines up very well for Ben Johnson to not have taken a job last year, started all these conversations, because you have to. You're never going to get everybody you want. They're not all going to be available. It's not an upgrade to everybody. Some are going to be under contract and want to stay. Some are going to get their own elevations within their organization, or another one, they're going to get their own head coaching jobs. And so it's a very fluid situation, and it happens pretty darn quickly. But having been through that whole round last year, when he was taking head coach, interviews, and they were asking the same question: who are you going to bring with you? He was making all those reaches then and sort of expanding and growing the network and saying, hey, if this happens, do you want a spot? Where are you at? And it wasn't something he had to start fresh this year in the middle of a, champ or a playoff run for sure. So I think that experience really paid off for him with guys like Dennis Allen. But, also, the next guy I'm going to talk about, who's one of the hires I'm most excited about on the entire staff, which is Al Harris, because Al Harris not only has been a rising coaching star, if you've been listening in coaching circles for years, but also has already held the title of assistant head coach. So hasn't been a head coach, but he's been that one tick below. And again, that kind of experience and savvy coming over, not even as a coordinator on this staff, speaks to me in terms of how much he wants to work with Ben Johnson and how much he believes in sort of this program and where he thinks it can go. So the time that they met was all the way back in Al Harris's first stop, which is working for the Miami Dolphins under Joe Philbin in 2012. That's the staff that he and Ben were both on. So they've been in contact since then, and this is not uncommon. It's one of the really cool things you get to see when you go to all-star games or pro days or the combine or anything else, is all the coaches and scouts and everybody intermixing, because lots of them have worked for each other, with each other, in different stops. They're looking for new jobs. They're talking about the job they had 10 years ago when they first met. And all those sort of connections just go round and round in the league. So as we look back to Al Harris, that's when he met Ben Johnson. They've obviously been watching each other's coaching trajectory since then. And again, the fact that the staff gets moved on from in Dallas, Al Harris isn't retained. He's available, and he's willing to basically take a demotion, not be an assistant head coach, to come here, not even be a coordinator, and still work on Ben's staff. Speaks volumes to me about how much he believes in what Chicago's going to do in the near future. So really, really happy to have Al Harris on staff. I know some folks will hold the fact that he was a former Green Bay Packer against him. I think bygones will be bygones pretty quickly if the defense is pretty good. But he's done a lot since then. Coached with the Dolphins, like I said. Then he went on to work with the Kansas City Chiefs. He's coached under Reed and Spags. He went on to the Cowboys. That's where he was an assistant head coach, basically ran the defense there. His defensive backfield for the Cowboys was amazing. His ability to develop young talent, tremendous. Guys like Deron Bland, Trayvon Diggs as well. And then now he comes and he gets to be the defensive passing game coordinator. This is a very good get in NFL terms. And one of the hires that after Dennis Allen, which was, as you mentioned, almost immediate, was like, he got Al Harris. Okay, to do what? Like, I don't really care what the title is. Like, he's a good coach. He was a very good football player, and has been on a basically a rocket trajectory in coaching. He has not been coaching that long. The Dolphins was 2012, which I know sounds like a long time ago, but in coaching circles, to be, already having been an assistant head coach, like, this is a very successful young coach. So I was just glad when they grabbed him. And that's when I really started to feel like, okay, there's some momentum here. That the staff is not only just going to be good, but very good very quickly.
Yeah, in preparation for who the Bears were going to hire, I was speaking over text to kind of a couple of Dallas reporters that cover the Cowboys on a weekly basis because it was gearing towards Mike McCarthy potentially being
Yeah,
a
for
Bears
sure.
head coaching one. And so I went off and kind of was looking at, okay, so if that is the case, who are potential coaches? And the one thing that I asked a lot of them about was Al Harris. And like, is this a possibility that he could come? And most of them were saying if McCarthy goes, it's very likely that he would be his defensive coordinator.
Yep.
And it made me kind of dig in a little bit more. I put a couple of things out on that and kind of in the vein of hoping that if this happens, that he would be on the staff. So then when I heard that he actually still joined Ben Johnson's staff and you're getting Dennis Allen, I was like, this is a surprise because
Yeah.
I did not expect him, as you said, to essentially take that job. But the interesting thing, I think it's a smart move for him because he gets to be himself. He gets to be part of kind of like I said, an aggressive defense that they have talent there. If the Bears do turn this around, he's a young coach. He'll get propelled into the head coaching searches,
Yep.
and it would be something that he would deserve. I think it's a phenomenal one. I think he links so well with what Dennis Allen does in terms of their coaching philosophies, and they can really kind of, you have a guy in terms of Dennis Allen who's been there, done that, but also you have a guy coming through that, like, he's going to be able to soak in all of that. Someone that can really kind of link with the players because he's not too far gone from his own playing career, which I do think is important. And someone that a lot of these young players on defense can kind of look up to a little bit and how to be professionals. I'm looking at you, Tyreek Stevenson. That would be that would be a good one for you to follow.
Yep.
But I think in terms of the hire, I think when I heard this happen, knowing that Dennis Allen was coming in, I was like, I feel pretty confident with what they're doing on the defensive side of the football, and it's a it was long overdue when you notice what was happening on the defensive side of the football last year. I know Eberflus was a good defensive coach, but you could tell that even that side of the football had checked out.
Yep.
That's not happening with a Dennis Allen and Al Harris because they won't let that happen. And I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, Eberflus was a great defensive coach right up until the Fail Mary. And after that, I mean, statistically and inside the locker room as well, the team broke. It
Mm-hmm.
literally broke. So that narrative held on for a couple more weeks. And then by a month later, it was like, oh, nope, that's over. And that's the strange thing about the NFL is narratives kind of get ingrained and they tend to last a little bit longer than the actuality. And when they fall off pretty hard. So who is your second choice for coach on this Bears staff that you're really excited about?
It's one I did not expect to be talking about. It like up until about 2 weeks ago because I doing kind of the tracking of who was coming in. Obviously, we had like the young OC. Everybody was expecting the O line coach. We had like Antoine Randle, JT Barrett. And I was like, oh, I like this. There's a good mix of experience and there's a good mix of kind of these young coaches. And then a random Saturday, I think was it the weekend of the championship game that was coming out. It was the first game that was on, and suddenly the Bears decide to make news by hiring Eric Bieniemy as their running back coach. And I was like, ooh, that's a
Yeah.
name that we've heard a lot before in terms of head coaching searches, in terms of like even OC candidates. Obviously, he goes to UCLA and he kind of goes the collegiate route because didn't get his head coaching opportunity. But again, knows Ryan Poles really well from his time in Kansas City, a very experienced coach. And honestly, getting him in as a running backs coach where he applied his trade originally and he gets to focus on that, and knowing what we know about Ben Johnson, where he is going to have a particular focus on the running game. There is not a better running back coach that you can coach guys hard with than Eric Bieniemy. He's going to be able to set the standard that they want on offense, and kind of going back and kind of seeing where he really kind of developed himself as a coach. Again, it's one of those where you can't criticize the move, because again, we've seen it. He hasn't been hired as a head coach in the past. And when he was like an offensive coordinator and stuff, he's probably not going to get hired as a head coach now. So like, even if you lost one or two players on, or one or two coaches on the offensive side of football, if you did have some like crazy statistical season, you're probably not losing Eric Bieniemy as well. So it is a good one. It's like I said, it is good to have the mixture of experience, but also kind of the young coaches coming through, kind of what happened with Ben Johnson. He was the younger guy, but there was a lot of experience around him. We've heard that they want to coach these players hard. There is not a coach in the National Football League that I think would coach players harder than Eric Bieniemy. And when you have the cachet of just his name, but also the success that he has had, the impact that there's guys around the league that love him. And that is important when you're coming into a locker room. He will be there and he will command respect from that locker room. And we've said it before. What's the easiest way to help Caleb Williams, maybe other than getting a very talented offensive line, is getting a running game going. This is a good start. Before adding whatever players, you've added a coach that you can at least trust that will be able to develop guys. That if you draft someone this year, which I would expect them to do at some point because of the running back class, there's not a coach better at that position to be able to develop said running back. So I was really excited when I heard it, even digging in more to see what he's been able to do even prior to his kind of OC career with the Kansas City Chiefs. Like you can look at the Kansas City Chiefs and some of the guys that he's been able to help there. Obviously, people will go back to his career with the Minnesota Vikings and obviously having like Adrian Peterson and stuff, but like even the way that he was able to turn on Kareem Hunt at that stage, who was basically, am I right in saying he was like an undrafted free agent when he came out, I think, or maybe a very late round pick, and he was able to develop him into what we now know as those early years for Kareem, where he was fantastic. And these are types of things that you look at and you analyze and you're like, it just makes so much sense, but it was not one I was expecting. And that's what I think makes it exciting, because we kind of got news filtering through of all these different coaches. He was the only one that I think was basically, it just leaked from everywhere that he was getting hired. And those are the type of moves I love. When it hits free agency, I love when it's just like, oh, the Bears have signed this player, instead of the Bears are interested. Oh, that maybe they'll pay this guy this man. When it just hits, those are the best ones. And that's why I was very, very happy when that news came out, because it was one you weren't expecting, but it was one that made a hell of a lot of sense.
Yeah, super experienced coach. You think about those Kansas City offenses that he presided over, and everybody says, oh, and he was calling plays. Sure. Yeah, absolutely. You're right. But I don't much care. Their offenses were better when he was there. And I love the link with UCLA. It's not so much that the Bruins offense was amazing. It was certainly better than it was before he got there, but it's links to those players. And typically we're going to see that in the later rounds. We get down to the 4th round, the 5th round, the 6th round. You're going to be looking at players, and some of those UCLA players are going to come up and they're going to go, yo, EB, you worked with this dude. You watched him every day in practice. Is this a guy we want in this locker room? You know what we're going for here. And those links to coaches who have been in college, who came fresh from college, are invaluable, because even if it's not guys on their team, if it's guys they coached against or guys they recruited and didn't get, which are legion, they have a very fresh thing, which goes bad really quickly. Quite frankly, if you're in the league 2 or 3 years, like those links don't really exist anymore because basically an entire college class is turned over. But for now, there are several coaches on the Bears staff who have those links and have seen those guys on a field level, either with or against, and are going to be able to bring that to the draft process, which is really, really valuable, along with all the offensive experience and the fact that they are looking at a renewed rushing attack. They have made no bones about the fact they're going to turn that room over a little bit. Obviously, they turn the coaching staff over. They are going to bring a very different emphasis to the running game in Chicago, and I'm all for it. You talked a little bit about the running back class. We're going to talk about that a lot. It is a loaded class. They are going to have the opportunity to pick up 1 or 2 running backs if they want to in this class. 1 up high, 1 down low, 2 down low, doesn't matter. Again, with proven development ability, almost anything's possible. There's a lot of talent in this class. My second coach is Antoine Randle, who comes over with Ben Johnson from the Detroit Lions. He was an OG Dan Campbell hire, was hired with right after Dan Campbell got the job. We've talked about him on Bootleg in our summer preview series for the last 2 years as a rising coach. All the success you have seen from Detroit wide receivers in recent years, he has been the coach for that. And really interesting background for those of you that don't know. He played quarterback in college, converted to wide receiver, was a wide receiver himself in the National Football League. That was a very common move for a while, especially in those days, especially with athletic quarterbacks not getting a fair shake. And in the NFL, it was like, what can you do? It's, oh, you can go play receiver. And you understand this from the opposite side of the offensive chalkboard. You know what the guy throwing you the ball is looking for, so you can bring even more ability to doing that. Antoine Randle was one of that wave of players. Got his start with Bruce Arians in Tampa Bay. That was his first coaching job in the NFL. Then obviously OG hire with the Lions, has been there with Dan Campbell the entire time, and now moves over to the Chicago Bears. And that brings me a lot of excitement because of the success he had at his previous stop and the development we saw from guys like Jameson Williams. Took a little while, but we finally got to see Jameson Williams start to blossom into what he thought he might be. Obviously, Amon-Ra St. Brown has dominated since he arrived. That's all Antoine Randle being his position coach. So obviously there's a lot of hope for Rome. There's a hope for a resurgence from DJ, who had a very up and down and kind of wild season last year. We'll see how the rest of the wide receiver room gets fleshed out. But again, I have hope no matter who they bring in, whether it is a more grizzled free agent or a down the board wide receiver from this quote unquote down wide receiver class. Everybody keeps saying that. Kind of bothers me because it's a different wide receiver class than we've seen for the last 2 or 3 years. There's a lot of talented dudes in this class up and down the board. So I have a lot of faith with a guy like Antoine Randle that whoever the Bears end up with in the mix at wide receiver, he understands. That's the other thing, is he's been with Ben for the last 3 years too. So he gets it. He understands exactly what he's looking for, both in player type and in execution on the field. And it's just like another boost, right?
Yeah.
It's going to happen quicker because Ben doesn't have to instill that in a new wide receivers coach. He can just say, and Antoine could say, yep, got it. No problem.
Yeah.
So super excited about that as well. There are a bunch of other coaches. I see some questions about some of them. Again, picking just 2 was kind of hard, and that's awesome. Like that's really, really cool. I did see probably our most important hire outside of Ben himself and the defensive hire, which we talked about. Number 3 is the offensive line coach, because the offensive line has been the root of all evil for offensive failure in Chicago for the last 2 to 3 years. And they go get Dan Rochar from Tulane, who was previously with the Saints. Some questions about our opinions on him. My answer to that would be one of the best pieces I've seen is Taylor Dopp over at Second City Gridiron interviewed Maddie Hudek. And I know Maddie, she's the sideline reporter for Tulane. So she's covered Dan up close for a couple of years. really has a lot of good insights. Go check out that interview. Taylor's fantastic. Maddie's amazing. Some really good insights into Dan and his coaching style, what he brings, and the job he had to do at Tulane over the last couple of years, which was quite different year to year, which gives us even more data to kind of work with. I'm encouraged. This long, short answer there is I'm encouraged by that hire. They just grabbed another guy today from Oregon State, who obviously last year worked with Talisi Fuaga. This year is working with a guy named Joshua Gray, who you probably don't know yet, all of you out there. He's a center prospect. We got to meet him and interview him at Shrine Bowl. I actually really like Josh. I think he's a good player. Again, fresh college coach, fresh link. He's probably going to be available late. Would not be at all surprised if Josh Gray ended up being a Bear. But those kind of links are super important. And again, continuing to build the coaching staff, even though you basically have all the slots filled, is a move that I love, because there's no coaching cap. Like, coaching salaries for the top coaches are guaranteed, but you can have 25, 26 coaches if you want to. Some organizations do. If Ben thinks that's a benefit to him in this first year, again, so he can kind of it reminds me of like young quarterbacks talk about cutting the field in half, right? We're going to do half field reads to make it simpler for you. It's like a half field read for a coach, right? He can concentrate on the offense and go, Dennis, you just do the defense, and I'm going to read my lane. I'm going to read my half, and that makes it easier. And if he can do that down the line for other coaches, hey, offensive line coach, you're going to do this. Assistant offensive line coach, you're going to do this, and divide and conquer in that way. And he thinks that's an effective way to delegate. More power to him. So really encouraged by the hires that we mentioned, but also all the others. If you have comments about those, throw them in the comment section, and we will get to answering some questions, because we are so glad all of you are here. If you're not subscribed, make sure to do that. We are at, I checked before we started, 866 in terms of subscribers.
So close.
We want to get to 1,000 before the NFL draft. We're going to continue to bring you good content. I'm going to be at the Combine for the entire week. I get there Sunday, and I'm there through the next Monday. I'll be on the field for drills again, because the NFL was foolish enough to say, hey, we liked what you did last year. We're going to give you another pass to go do this. So going to be seeing a lot of guys up close, going to be seeing a lot of the guys we interviewed at Shrine again. So lots of good content coming on the channel. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss live streams like this or updates that we have as they come in. We'll probably be doing these about once a month, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. The cool thing about Bear Era is we have the flexibility to do it when there's news, and we don't have to when there's not. So if you show up and we're putting out content, there's a reason. All killer, no filler. We'd love to have you. We're very happy you're here. Thank you for showing up, and tell your friends, tell your Bear friends that, look, the Bears are back. I want you to tell the streets we back up. So Ben Johnson's the coach, and we're going to ride right along with that wave. Should be very good for all of us. So thanks for that, but we'll dig into some questions.
Yeah. What's the first one there that we have?
I'm looking. I'm going to go all the way back to, good to see you, Chris. Chris is with us again. Post-hiring process. This one's from Dean C. Dean, thanks for this. Has your estimation of Kevin Warren shifted in any way? What have we learned about his involvement in football ops? Rick Smith implied Kevin was the key contact early in the process. I think we've learned that he can get it done. This was a big rock. This is a stake in the ground moment for Kevin Warren. Either he was going to get this done, and by this, I mean getting the hire he wanted to come to Chicago and really change, we all hope, change the course of this franchise in a very positive way. And he's going to be judged by it. And he knows that. He is tied to this hire in a lot of Bears fans' minds and estimations. This is why he was brought along. I originally thought he was brought along mostly to manage the stadium process. My opinion of that, based on Warren and when he appeared and what he said when he appeared, really started to change over the last 6 months, and think it would be more this role where he was really the sort of football czar in charge of everything. And I think this is a huge feather in his cap. Ben Johnson was the get in this coaching cycle. There's no two ways about that. It's not like, oh, Ben or the other guy. Like, doesn't mean he'll be the most successful coach. He was the top target, the apple of all teams' eyes that, had coaching vacancies, and the Bears got him, and he wanted to come here. those two things are important independently, but I think Kevin Warren can kind of sit back and cross his arms across his chest. I'm not saying stop working, but go, I told you I could get it done, and I got it done. And getting something like that across the finish line in the NFL is important. We hadn't seen it yet from Warren in the pros. We'd seen it in his ranks as, Big Ten commissioner. But I think it is a solid affirmation that he can do the job he needs to do to move the Bears along. And now, look, it's up to the coaching staff and all these subsequent hires and everything else. And maybe he can turn his focus more towards the stadium and getting that done, because that's also a big deal for a place like Chicago. But he needed to get this done and do it well. He did both. You really can't ask for anything more than that. It looked really incompetent in the beginning in terms of the way it was being handled and what people were saying about it. There was a ton of smoke and mix, and it was not confidence inspiring from the outside. But the bottom line is the top fish in the pool swam up and said, I want to be in your tank. I want to run your world. And Kevin Warren hooked him, brought him in, and that's it. You got the fish on the boat. Let's go.
Yeah. From anyone that you spoke to, from especially learning after, I think it was Courtney Cronin did a really good story on the entire process of hiring these coaches. And the one thing that came across was that it really was Kevin Warren that shifted the mindset from George McCaskey, where he's like, look, if you want to be successful, you need to start acting like a successful franchise in the 21st century. And we've seen that happen. Obviously, the Bears putting out the 1920 football drive today, like a big thing was you saw, like in terms of Ben Johnson coming in, private jet, and who's there meeting him? George McCaskey's there, Kevin Warren comes there. The interesting thing that I looked at, because I always like to see kind of the body language of guys when you are first meeting certain people, because obviously they were on Zoom. And you could tell very early on that Ben Johnson did hit it off with Kevin Warren, because that wasn't a fake embrace. Like when he was going and talking to you could tell that they had a good initial vibe from each other, a good relationship there. And that's what you want to see, because Kevin Warren is an important member of this organization now. So is Ryan Poles, because he is remaining as the GM. And the same thing with Ben Johnson, and all three of those levels need to work in unison, and that's what's really important. The one thing I think that, and it's kind of mixes with the coaching staff that they brought in, I think Kevin Warren has brought a sense of aggressiveness into this organization, that we have to get these decisions right. He mentioned it after or right before the hiring of Ben Johnson when he was talking, that there's like, we have to get this right, because this is an important hire for the next 15 to 20 years. And you have to give him credit. If they got this wrong and they didn't get their guy, people would be able to criticize him. And people would say, well, you're just all talk. But he's not all talk, because he got it done. And we can say, oh, people can give the credit to Ryan Poles. That's fine. But Ryan Poles has been here. And we saw what happened with the first hiring of Eberflus. It was the wrong decision. And then doubling down on it was an even worse decision. Well, the only difference between the past hires that we've seen and this current one, where we've been told by different people that the way the Bears conducted themselves was like a first-class organization, which has never happened in the past. And the only difference there is Kevin Warren was actively involved in every aspect of it. So you have to give him his credit. Does it mean that it's definitely going to work? No. But the one thing you can say is, if it doesn't work, you can't criticize the process, because they got the guy that they targeted. They got the guy that pretty much every team with an opening targeted. So like, there's not much more to say. Now it's down to Ryan Poles to get the players that are going to fit these new coaches' systems, both in terms of scheme, but also mentality, philosophy. Like, you can get a guy that's going to fit what Ben Johnson wants to do on offense, but like, if you just get an offensive lineman that is just a complete technician and doesn't want to kill the guy that's opposite him, it's probably not going to work.
It's
Like
probably not going to work.
So it's something that I always say. It's like there are two aspects of getting a guy that's going to fit the system that the coach wants to run, but also I always say is when you look at a certain team, that team should embody what the coach is. Like, why do we praise the Detroit Lions? Because we're like, well, you can see they fit what Dan Campbell is. And that's what you want to, by the end of this next year, I want to look at the Bears and I want to be like, I know exactly the type of coach Ben Johnson is because I can see it in the players, both in how they react as Chicago Bears, but also how they play. And I think that's going to be an important element of this. But yeah, I think Kevin Warren, you give him credit for now, and we wait and see what can happen. Because again, one of his decisions would have been to keep Ryan Poles. So now it's up to Ryan Poles to get those decisions right in terms of personnel. If he doesn't, well, then there is a little black mark there on Kevin Warren. But for now, you give him the credit. They got the coaching search right. What we're hearing about the coaching search was very positive. So we give them credit for that and we wait and see on what happens with the roster. If they can improve the roster to the point of where this team is competing in this division, I don't think you can criticize much of what Kevin Warren has done in terms of the decisions he's made for the footballing side of things, because for way too long, those decisions have been incorrect. And this is the first time where I go into an offseason actually being fairly confident in the axis between the head coach and the quarterback.
Yeah, for sure. And they linked their contracts. They finally freaking linked the GM and the head coach in contracts. For those of you that don't know what that means, if you have two different periods between the GM contract and the head coach contract, whenever a decision comes up, typically a decision in the past for the head coach to move on, in Chicago's case, it's always a question of he said, she said, whose fault is it? Where's the blame lie? And they're not locked together in lockstep. One of the major things that was not recorded or reported in a major way is that they made Ryan Poles' contract match. So now he is in lockstep with Ben Johnson and they are locked together. If they cannot execute the handshake that you just talked about, which is so important between GM and head coach, of finding the right types of players and agreeing on bringing those in, because assets are limited. You have a certain number of draft picks, a certain number of dollars. You can't just go grab everybody. You need to be very strategic about that. And that is the art of team building, and they have to do it together. It can't be one or the other. And having their contracts linked is incredibly important. And the Bears, for the last ad nauseum of recent history, have had staggered contracts between GMs and head coaches. And it leads to this rift in the organization, as opposed to like, hey, we're getting there and burning the boats. Like, we are there together. We win this together or we lose this together. We, didn't necessarily get hired together, but we are most certainly going to get fired together if it doesn't work. It is a very different sort of esprit de corps, and the Bears got that right as well, which was less publicized, but I would say not equally important, but also very, very important. Dawson says, what are the chances of a Myles Garrett, Micah Parsons trade? If they are not traded until after the draft, I would be fine with giving up 2 firsts. Yeah, I think in terms of who they both are as players, of course you want them on your team. That's great. The Bears are not in that place. I'm just going to say that right now. Like, if you are 1 or 2 players away, going and getting a Myles Garrett or a Micah Parsons to put you over the top and spend a lot to do it, that will handicap you in the short term and especially in the long term, is fine. You're making that push. Lots of teams have done that in the past. We're going to push all our chips to the middle. Rams did it a few years ago, won a Super Bowl. Like, we're going to, stack up all the contracts, and then we're going to do a quick, tear down rebuild because we have to financially, but we got the ring. Like, that's a thing, but you have to be close. And the Bears have a lot of things going for them, but they're not close. They're not 1 to 2 players away. They need to almost completely rebuild the offensive line. They need more defensive line help as well. There's going to be some shift at linebacker, at safety as well. So they need another tight end. Like, there's a bunch of building to do here, and it will, as you mentioned, cost a lot of assets to get players in that category, which are, these are two of the top 3 or 4 edge rushers in the entire league. Yes, it's great to have them on your team and it would bring a lot of fun on defense. But from a team building standpoint, that art I just talked about, that balance, it's not really in the card for the Bears to spend that much on a single asset. They simply can't afford it from a team building standpoint with where they are in their development cycle. They have more needs than they have assets right now. So giving up a whole pile of assets for one, it is a need. Yes, you need another defensive end for sure. And you'll always take a blue chip talent, but are they in the right part of the cycle to do that? I would say absolutely not. So even if those players do come available, I would not expect the Bears to be extremely strong players right at the top of the market in terms of what needed to be paid to get them to Chicago.
Can Micah Parsons or Myles Garrett play on the offensive line for the Bears?
Well, Myles Garrett, from a physical standpoint, could. He's not going to. I think he likes his job just fine. He's really good at it. But it's just not the right time necessarily. Now, hey, if either one of those guys ends up being a Bear, I'm going to be thrilled because they're great players.
I won't complain.
But the cost would likely be prohibitive right now with where they are.
Yeah, like personally, I would rather you use your capital, especially if it comes to free agency, in terms of trying to shore up that offensive line. I think that's going to be an important one. If the Bears were inclined to have to trade multiple picks to get a player, I think I'd rather them move up in the current draft and try and get the top edge rusher there, which I don't think is going to be possible. But like, if you're talking about trading 2 first-round picks, I'd rather trade the picks for a guy you have under control for 5 seasons versus someone that you're going to have to pay $30 million to per year who's entering their 30-something season. Like, that's I wouldn't do either personally. Like, I don't think you need to be moving up in the draft too high and giving away important capital for where you are, because you have a lot of things that you need to fix up, which we will be talking about today. But I do think that is important. Before we do move on to the next one, there has been kind of a report on another coach that the Bears have hired. So they have hired San Diego offensive coordinator / QB coach Matt Aponte. So he was. So they haven't said as what. I would assume it's the assistant QB coach, which is an interesting dynamic. 2 very young quarterback coaches in JT Barrett and Aponte, but he was the youngest offensive coordinator in Division I football last year. So he worked at Iowa before San Diego. So again, an interesting link. Again, when we talk about the draft, about certain guys that he would have worked with, but again, it's the mixture of experience and youth moving up within the staff, and I really like what they're kind of building. I just wanted to mention that before we moved on, because I think it's an important move.
San Diego or San Diego State?
I think San Diego.
Okay. Anybody know the mascot for San Diego? USD?
Ooh.
I only know this because I went to a conference there years ago, and we actually stayed on campus in the dorms. It was during the summer.
Is it?
We'll see if chat gets it right. I mean, somebody can obviously Google it, but that's less fun.
It is less fun.
If you went to school in Southern California and you know USD's mascot, type it in. But it's a fun one. It's regional. It's a lot of fun. But that's really cool to see. Again, to see this sort of second wave. It's almost like the second wave of free agency now, the second wave of coaching hires. We have all the necessary coaches to sort of field a coaching staff. Now we're just grabbing folks that we want, who we think will beef out the staff in the way. Chris Armstrong says Aztec. That is San Diego State. That's why I asked. That is Marshall Faulk's alma mater. And yes, you are correct. San Diego State is the Aztecs. University of San Diego is the Toreros, which is the Mexican term for bullfighters.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so it's pretty cool. But yeah. Anyways, let's get back to it. We've got a bunch of good questions. We've got 52 people hanging out with us. Thanks very much for that. We appreciate it. I'm going to scroll all the way back. How much influence can we expect Press Taylor to have? Seems like an odd hire given his track record. It is, again, with coaching hires, so much of it's a relationship business. And I can't stress that highly enough. And again, it's really interesting when you have an offensive guy like Press Taylor coming into what is an offensive coaching staff. We talked about this earlier with the Chiefs being, oh, Andy called the plays, so Eric wasn't really all that important, or, Andy's calling the plays and therefore Matt Nagy's not doing anything or whatever else. Ben Johnson's going to be calling the plays. Let's be honest. He has not been shy about that. And I think that is the prevailing notion, not only from within the NFL, but also fans as well. Is like, Ben Johnson damn well better be calling the plays. That's what he is here for. So Press Taylor is going to be helping, and I put helping in quotes, and that just means we don't really know what he's going to be doing, despite his title, right? He's certainly not going to be calling plays. I don't think that's going to be a thing. Jacksonville fans will blanch at that a little bit because Doug Peterson famously handed him the reins and then kind of took him back, and we've seen that happen in Chicago, so we feel that as well, but that's not happening here. Ben Johnson did not bring in Press Taylor to call plays. He brought in Press Taylor as another set of eyes to focus on, and that's the big X, right? We don't know. He's going to put him on jobs he wants done every week to help the Bears prepare, whether that's play calling, tendencies, personnel usage, whatever it is. He's gonna set Press Taylor into situational football, maybe. You never know, and say, I need you to do that so that I can do my job, which is calling plays, better. And I think because of Press Taylor's history, especially with the way the press was handled in Jacksonville, a lot of Bears fans had the same reaction, sort of raised eyebrows, like, Press Taylor, like, what are we doing there? And the answer is, again, it's a relationship business. Ben felt solid enough about bringing him in and what he could bring to his staff, knowing full well that he was not going to be giving him the keys, and that was going to be a help. And he did it pretty early in the process. It was not a like, oh, well, picking kickball sides and, oh, Press Taylor's left, so I guess I'll get him on my staff. Like, this was a purposeful move. And I don't know that we'll really know what his individual influence is on the offensive game plan week to week during the season. But I'm not going to look sideways at it right now, generally because of the strength of the staff. Like, if Press Taylor was the biggest name that Ben Johnson brought in, yeah, I would have raised my eyebrows too. But as we just talked about, there are multiple coaches here who have a ton of experience, have been head coaches, have been assistant head coaches. Press Taylor is also kind of nice to have in Ben Johnson's eyes, and I'm fine with that.
I am fine with it because if you do look into his background prior to him being the offensive coordinator for the Jacksonville Jaguars, the role that he's likely going to be doing here is essentially the same role that he was doing with the Philadelphia Eagles, where he will be looking at opposing offenses, seeing what they've done, looking at the red zone plays, being like, what can we incorporate into our game plan this week that could work? And he was revered with the Philadelphia Eagles, especially during that Super Bowl run, right? Like, he was a guy that, first of all, the players respected. Like, he's a good coach. He may not be a great play caller, but the great thing about this is, and I think I put this out at the time, is that he is fourth or fifth in command when it comes to the offense. Like, you're looking at Ben Johnson is number one. Antoine Randle is probably number two because he's the assistant head coach / wide receiver coach. You then have Declan Doyle, who is your offensive coordinator. Then maybe it's Press Taylor, but you could potentially put Eric Bieniemy in front of him as well because he's had more success at calling plays if some crazy illness goes through Hallis Hall for some reason. Like, I think what you do is you get guys that have good offensive mind that can come together, that can build out a game plan. Because like you said, Ben Johnson is the play caller, but it's not just on one guy that comes up with what are we going to do this week. There's going to be guys that be like, okay, this is the defense we're coming up with. These are their tendencies. These are the types of plays that we can call in these situations that are going to be able to put us in an advantageous position. What are some of the things that they don't do well that we can incorporate this week that maybe we haven't incorporated in previous weeks? when we get into the red zone, where do they struggle versus where we can have success? That's what some of these coaches are going to be doing. Like, it's not just that you're going to just rely solely on Ben Johnson, because if you're relying solely on one coach on the offensive or defensive side of the football, you're not going to be a good football team. And that's why we said this at the very beginning. You can get Ben Johnson. He needs to put together a staff that you feel good about. He has put together a staff that I feel really good about, and he continues to add pieces to this. Like you mentioned at the start of this stream, we could come to the end of this and he could have 27, 28 coaches, because you could have a bunch of young assistant coaches, quality control coaches that in 2 or 3 years are making up some of the most important positions on the coaching staff, because that's what a good head coach does. That's why we keep talking about the Sean McVay coaching tree, because someone leaves, but he already has the idea of who's taking over. And that's what you want Ben Johnson to start doing, is that you have your experienced guys now, but then when you need to move on from them, or maybe they get a job somewhere else where they get a promotion, you already have somebody in-house that you can promote, you believe in, they've been in your system, and you don't have to start over again on getting a new wide receiver coach or a new QB coach. Like, let's say Caleb Williams looks absolutely amazing, and then somebody wants to hire JT Barrett as an offensive coordinator. Well, we've just mentioned on the show 5 minutes ago that they brought in a young guy that can learn as well, that maybe he just gets catapulted into the QB coach role, and you already have somebody there. And that's what I like about him. Press Taylor, he has experience. He's done this role before. He's been successful at this role. Don't worry about it. He ain't calling plays. That's Ben Johnson's job, and he ain't giving it up.
Yeah, and with good reason. Joseph Kavanaugh has a really good question. Good to see you again, Joseph. With Mercedes Lewis probably retiring and Gerald Everett likely being a cut candidate, how are you with restocking this tight end room? He says, I like Chris Manhertz to replace Lewis and Harold Fannin Jr. for Everett. Well, Harold Fannin Jr. might be a little bit more than Everett. We'll see. I am very good with restocking this tight end room. I've spent 2 of the last 3 days looking at tight ends. I'm 12 deep in this particular class, which is enough for me to get to the combine. And I really like it. And there are some folks down the board as well as top talent. Like Tyler Warren is my guy up high. I know a lot of people like Colson Loveland. I like him as well. I like Tyler Warren because I think he's more versatile. I put out a tweet about him yesterday. He would be ridiculous fun with Ben Johnson. You know, do I think that's the best spending of draft resources for where Tyler Warren's going to go? I don't, but it would just be fun, which is why I put it out there. But there are guys all up and down the board. I mentioned Eric Bieniemy and his relationship to UCLA very purposefully, because one of those tight ends is from UCLA, and down the board as a straight blocking Y, he would be super fun. He was at Oregon, and then he went to UCLA. He is 6'5", 265.
It's a fun name too.
Yeah, he's a lot of fun. So, you know, but up and down, you know, Brant Keithy, I was talking with my friend Brad Spielberger about this, because like Brant Keithy's literally been in college forever. He went to Utah, and I put out a tweet, I think now it was 6 years ago. And I said, Brant Keithy, man, keep an eye on this kid. And then he got hurt, and he back, and he got another year. And he's just him and Cam Rising. They've just stayed forever. He's had a crazy injury history. I know that. He is an overage prospect. I know that. I am still Brant Keithy pilled. And if you're talking about an Everett, you know, replacement way down the board, like Brant Keithy from Utah would be super fun. He's not super big. He's about 6'2", he's about 230. He's fast as hell. He's really tough. You know, there are a lot of players in this tight end group. It is probably the third best position group in this entire draft. It's better than it's been for years. There is, again, high-end talent up top, mid-range talent that you're going to be able to pick up that's going to be able to contribute, and then guys you can take wild card flyers on down the board, you know, 5th, 6th, 7th round even, who could end up being contributors as TE2 or TE3, depending on the roles you're looking for. So I think the Bears need an influx of tight end talent. It is a very good year to have this class come along for them like this. I think Ben Johnson understands how to use tight ends in creative ways. So Joseph, I am all for restocking this tight end room. If they want to do a little bit in free agency and dabble in the draft, or they want to put 2 lower draft picks towards it, I'm all about it because the talent is there and they need it.
Yeah. Brent Keithy is a name that 2 years ago, I remember doing a lot of work on the offensive side of the football in the draft, and he was one I kept coming back to. Him and then I
and he was 4 years in at that point.
Yeah, it was what, because we were both sick over the last couple of weeks. So while I was sick in bed, not being able to do anything, what did I do? I decided to start doing some draft research and properly going through it.
Nice.
And two names that popped up 2 years ago. One was Keithy and one was Ben Urasek, which I was like, how are these guys still?
Oh, and by the way, I found this out because how did I find this out? Oh, I was standing on the sideline at the Tremble, and there's an agent, one of the very first agents I ever met, who I met at the Tremble years ago, now 3-4 years ago. And every year I check in with her, and I ended up seeing her at the Combine, at the Shrine, and then famously a couple of years ago, the 3 pro days I showed up, she was at all of them because she had clients in each of those schools. And I was like, I'm not stalking you. Like, these are the only pro days I'm going to. So Molly and I talk all the time, and she's got Ben, and his last name is Urasek. Because nice. I and lots of other people said Urasek because that's what we thought. And she was like, so I have blank and Urasek. And I was like, excuse me? I would imagine you're getting it correctly because you're his agent, but it's Urasek. Okay, cool. It's Urasek.
Maybe he pronounces his own name wrong.
Anyway. Maybe.
But yeah, no, I agree. Like, in terms of Tyler Warren, yeah, like the talent is undeniable. If, like, let's say the Bears did move back a couple, like, let's say there's a dumb team like the Jets that want to move up and give you some extra draft capital, and you get to that point and you look at the talent between that versus maybe like the 4th best offensive lineman or the 4th best defensive lineman, and you're like, we have 2 second-round picks that we can address those positions in, or maybe we don't feel good about the offensive lineman in terms of tackles, and we're like, we can get a guard a little bit later on if we want to, or if we really want to, we can potentially trade back into the 1st with one of those second-round picks. Let's just go for the talent and do what the Raiders did last year, where you just get a guy that you can put into your offense, you know he's going to produce. And that's where I do think that he is at that point. And he is getting the very similar treatment that Brock Bowers got last year because he's a tight end, where Brock Bowers' talent last year, it was undeniable. And for some reason, I think it's probably just because there was the 3 receivers last year that he was getting pushed down. In most other years, if you just forgot what the position was and just watched him play, like, you knew what was coming. And it was a very obvious draft pick there in terms of if they do make that decision. I don't think it's going to be one that a lot of fans and a lot of media members in Chicago are going to like, but I don't think that it would be a bad pick because I think the talent is there. And seeing what Ben Johnson was able to do with Sam Laporta in Detroit, if you have 2 guys like a Cole Kmet and a Tyler Warren, it could bring another dimension to the offense, which we haven't seen.
Yeah, and I'm just going to raise my hand and say the fact that you have a Cole Kmet on your team doesn't keep you from picking anybody at tight end.
No.
Like, Cole is a fine player, and he has had good stretches, better stretches, and very poor stretches as a Chicago Bear. He was ascending at the beginning of last year, and at the end of last year, he fell off, much like a lot of folks on that team. I'm not going to hold that against Cole, but a lot of people are, well, we have Cole Kmet. Because you have a Cole Kmet on your team does not keep you from improving the talent at tight end. He's not that kind of player. He's not so dominant that you go, oh, well, we could only spend a 5th round pick because we have Cole Kmet and we re-signed him. Like, yes, but no. Like, you can still go get, and probably should go get, an influx of talent that is even better than Cole. What kind of assets you spend to do that, that's going to be an organizational priority thing, but there are a lot of chances up and down the board in this particular draft that are going to allow you to do that, which is super duper fun. There was a question about linebacking depths. It's from Chris. Any concerns about linebacker depth? I've found it to be underwhelming of late. I don't think it's underwhelming, but it's thin, and there has been some talk, especially recently over the last few days, about the possibility of moving on from Edmonds. And keeping Edwards, and that would mean Edwards and Sanborn as your starters, which I'm fine for. Jack's played very well in spot duty. He's come in and been the strong side linebacker. He's also been the number one backup, and he's played very well in those spots. And he is obviously cost controlled compared to the other two guys. I think Edwards played better than anybody in the linebacking core last year. Very much deserved his money and defensive leadership roles. Edmonds, I was a little bit underwhelmed by, and I'm not sure how much organizational importance Dennis Allen's going to put on middle linebacker. He had a great one for a long time in NOLA, but that is a luxury. I'm not sure that he views DeMario Davis and Edmonds in the same light. We'll see, but one of the other positions I spent the balance of the last 2 days on is inside linebacker. And again, I'm about 11 or 12 players deep in inside linebacker, and there are a bunch of good linebackers in this draft, some of them who are not going to be drafted up high. So if that was the eventuality, I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but if they move on from Edmonds, they keep Edwards and Sanborn as the starters, and then you do need some depth. Not only for special teams, but as backups. There are players in this draft who could contribute in those kinds of roles right away that you do not have to spend premium picks on, because inside linebacker has still not gotten the shine up that running back got over the last year, where it became important again and people are going to spend higher picks on it because of it. Inside linebacker is still kind of the, hey, we can hide inside linebackers. We don't need to spend premium picks, unless of course we're the Raiders and we believe very differently than that. You could look at what Fangio did with Zach Bond. He believed in him. Zach Bond was written off largely. I liked him a lot coming out, and he never reached those heights in New Orleans, right? Goes to 1 year for Philadelphia, becomes basically an MVP candidate, which is kind of ridiculous, but it shows you the situation matters and the talent's still there. There are a lot of guys down the board in this draft that you're going to be able to get in the fourth and the fifth, because people are going to be picking up all these very talented defensive linemen. People are going to be going after the limited amount of offensive tackles they can get. Some people believe very strongly that there's not a ton of depth later on down for wide receivers, so they're going to be racing to get those. And by just a factor of that, inside linebacker is going to kind of hang out on the board. And there's a bunch of players that you can get at that spot. So I would like to see the Bears spend a pick, and it could be farther on down. I will throw just one name out because there's a bunch of good ones. Sean Dolak, linebacker, University of Buffalo, wears number 52 at the University of Buffalo. That should ring a bell. Super fun player. Really aggressive, had a boatload of tackles, and you always kind of want to go to the tape and see what kind of tackles. We're talking like 170 tackles, like a machine. Very aggressive, very rarely ends up going backwards or getting dragged on a tackle. He is an old school, agile, mobile, hostile linebacker. And as I was going through his stat line, I was like, 5 picks? What? This year? So sometimes you go back and look, were they, balls that were bad by the defensive line? He just ran underneath them. No, 4 out of 5. You could argue 5 out of 5, but 4 out of 5, with no doubt, were hands picks undercutting the route. And I was like, dude, you can catch, like, if you were 2 inches taller, you could play tight end, like legit straight up. Sean Dolak, super duper fun, not going to be picked really high. A player I really like, one of the sort of early stones overturned, going through film, getting ready for the combine. You're like, I'd known about Dolak for, about 4 or 5 months now. He's on my list. I just hadn't gotten to him. And for some reason, I try and do the top 10 or 12 in any position group before I get to the combine. And I don't think a lot of people probably have Dolak as a top 10 or 12 linebacker, but I just clicked him off. I was like, I'm going to check him out. Sometimes you just get a hunch about a guy. And I was like, halfway through his tape, I was just cackling. And a lot of his production came against the best teams they played against. A lot of teams would be like, oh, he played for Buffalo, level of competition, blah, blah, blah. They played some big time teams, and he had big time games against them. And you love to see that. So love a guy like Sean Dolak. And if the Bears were to say, hey, we want to pick that guy up and have him as our, insert strong side linebacker when we go base, top special teamer and, first guy off the bench, if one of the linebackers gets hurt, like, I would be 100% fine with that. Plus there's top end talent there. Like, Jahad Campbell, who is redonkulous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely going to be an interesting one to see. Do they? It probably makes more sense to try and go younger in terms of going the draft route versus going free agency. Maybe they'll try and get some. I don't know. It depends on what happens with Tremaine Edmonds. Like, do they believe that last year was a product of the environment that he was in, or is it a worry that his production rapidly went down? Like you said, TJ Edwards is probably one of Pulse's best free agent pickups because you see what he's been able to do. He was signed on a very decent contract where you're not paying over the nose for him. It would be funny if the last time the Eagles played really, really good defensive football, we ended up getting TJ Edwards. Zach Bond is a free agent this year.
Yeah, I don't think
funny.
I don't think Bond's gonna get
So.
paid, whether he stays in
Yeah.
Philly or whether he moves on. And I could not be happier for that guy. I was very high on Zach Bond coming out. I thought he had a ton of potential, and he was just one of those guys that never really realized it. He played okay in fits and starts in NOLA, but he was largely quiet, and a lot of people forgot about him. That happens for a lot of guys that get drafted, and it's, just goes to show it's not always their fault, right? It's not that Zach Bond suddenly got better physically. It's that Vic Fangio took one look at him and went, nah, I don't need that guy as a special teamer or a backup, which is how he presented him to Vic. Vic went, no, that guy's a starting inside linebacker. And how he was like, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like a, second to third string backup special teamer we can get for cheap. And Vic said, I don't care what you think. Like, basically, if you bring that guy in here, he's going to end up starting on the inside. And Howie was like, okay. And they got him for a song, 1-year contract. He played extremely well and showed a lot of the things that he showed on tape in college. That just, for whatever reason, didn't manifest in the defense in New Orleans. So those guys are out there. It's one of the great lessons from being out on the road is that there are not 200 good football players that come out and a bunch of other guys every year. There are 500 great football players. They don't all even get drafted. And because of the situation, because of, their own particular application to the sport or not, like, there are 500 guys out there that can absolutely freaking ball.
Mm-hmm.
And you think there's not, but you end up talking to these guys and you realize that, you're like, why is this guy at Georgia Southern? And you look, oh, well, he started at Georgia and then he moved to Georgia Southern to be closer to home or whatever, take care of his mom, or, he got recruited as a 4-star by Georgia. He can still play. And those stories are just manifest all over the scouting world. Like, there are a ton of good football players out there, and getting the right match between coach that sees the potential, a system fit, and a guy who will apply himself, that's when you get lightning in a bottle. And you see guys just, somebody goes, oh, nobody figured he was the guy. That guy can ball. Absolutely.
Yeah. There was another good question in terms of draft stuff. It was P Nada says, talking about draft stuff, in case you didn't talk about it earlier, do you have any ideas in mind for the number 10 pick? I'm worried about no O-line, D-line, no trade down, and taking Janty, though I like him in brackets. So
yeah, that's what everybody says about Ashton Jeanty is like, I don't really want to take him. He's awesome, but I don't really want to take him. Look, Ashton Jeanty is a unbelievable football player. And I say football player on purpose. He is a great, great running back. And by great, I mean, if you look at his tape and statistical profile and weld them together, he is in rare air. We're talking about, he is on par with 3 or 4 of the greatest backs to come out of college football in the last 10 years. Like, he's in that category. We're talking about the stratosphere here. He is special, special, special. Now, we just talked about how deep the running back class is and how you're going to be able to get contributors all the way down. I just saw a guy at Shrine Bowl, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, who has a fascinating story, but was a big-time producer in his last full year of college production, had some eligibility questions, so he got shut down, really kind of wasn't his fault necessarily, but he only played one game this last year. Goes to an all-star game, absolutely tears it up, looks great against high-level competition. Everybody goes, who is this kid? I thought he was out because of injury because he only played one game, but it turned out it was eligibility from his former stop, not at the current place. They were a little bit worried about having to forfeit wins, so they couldn't come to a conclusion, so they just sat him. That guy didn't even get a combine invite, which is stupid. Like, he's got great size, great production at a D1 program, had a great all-star game experience. That typically adds up to a combine invite. Didn't even get a combine invite. So when I'm talking about, there's 500 guys out there, that guy can run the football, and there's good tape of him doing it against great competition in the last year of the Pac-12. And like, it's not really negotiable. He's not even going to go to the combine. Is he going to get drafted? He's absolutely going to get drafted. Could you get that guy down the board? Probably, certainly late day 2, probably even mid day 3. Yeah, just because of the number of players at that position. So do you need an Ashton Jeanty, who is a fantastic player way up high? It's tough to justify, but if anybody's going to justify it, it's a guy like Jeanty, because he is, we're not talking about like top 50 good in the last 5 to 10 years. We're talking about like top 5 good in the last 10 years in terms of running backs. Like, he is special.
I'm usually very much against picking running backs high in the draft. That's always been kind of a philosophy I've had. If Ryan Poles wants to pay Trey Smith over $100 million and he wants to pay someone like Ronnie Stanley to play left tackle, and then he decides he wants to go running back, okay. But if he's not able to rebuild that offensive line in free agency,
he's got to do that first, for sure.
That's the first thing. Look, it's different. If a guy like Mason Graham falls to 10, I'm fine. He's that good. Or if you like even if you like one of the edge rushers that you expected to go a little bit earlier, and they fall to you, and you have them a bit above other guys, like, I'm fine with going that direction. But my sole focus right now is, how do we make Caleb Williams the best possible player?
Yep.
And Jeanty is great if you fixed your O-line. I don't have a problem, because like you said, the talent is at a level that you're not going to see from other guys you can pick at 10, right? Like, let's just say you go, and I've seen, like, just from some of the main guys that have done like their mocks and stuff, which mean nothing right now, but I've seen like all these different offensive linemen. I've seen from Membu from Missouri, I've seen Josh Simmons, I've seen Banks, I've seen Will Campbell. Great. Like them all for different reasons.
Sure.
They're probably not better football players than Ashton Jeanty. But the difference is, if you don't have a quality offensive line, having Jeanty is probably not going to matter, because you're going to just look at the Saquon Barkley situation. What is the difference between what we've seen with him with Philadelphia versus what we saw with the Giants? The Giants struggled for years in building an offensive line, and Philadelphia has probably the best offensive line in football. And they probably have the best offensive line coach in football too. So those are the differences. Now, like I said, if Ryan Poles becomes aggressive in free agency and lands Trey Smith and lands, I don't know, even a veteran on the other side to play left guard, and you have a good option at left tackle, and you go into the draft being like, we don't have to force an offensive lineman early, we can wait until the second round, and you don't love the edge rushers that are available at 10, and you're like, I like the defensive tackle class that I feel like I can get one later, and this guy is by far the best football player we can get. Will I love the pick? I won't love it, because I don't like taking running backs that early just because of the health at that position. But can I go and say that it's not going to be a valuable pick for the Bears? No, because he's a phenomenal football player. So I think context will be needed. If they can rebuild and you feel confident in the offensive line via free agency, I won't be pissed off. If they don't fix, or they don't make good moves in free agency, and we go into the draft being like, we badly need an offensive lineman at 10, and he picks a running back, I'll probably be pissed.
It's not going to be a pick that makes people happy at the time. And by at the time, I mean, You have to do both. He's going to already have to have spent some money in free agency. I don't think he can spend enough money in free agency to make people like happy at 10 if that were to occur. You're going to have to wait for those picks in the second round and maybe even the pick in the third round. And if he does, again, let's say a guard in free agency, whoever up high and
Trey Smith.
I very happy if that happens. I've met Trey. I like him a lot.
Speak it into existence, EJ.
That's right. As many times as I can. If I see him, I will certainly do it because he is officially a free agent now. But I still don't think you have enough money in free agency to make people happy that the offensive line is fixed. And then, if you're going to pick Genty, you got to get him at 10. He's not going to be there when you pick in the second round. Then everybody's going to be on pins and needles for those picks in the second round. Are you getting another guard? Are you getting a center? Are you getting whatever? Are you getting two, right? Are you getting a center and a guard? Are you getting a tackle that fell if you like one of those, and they're not people aren't going to get happy with that pick until like the top couple rounds are done. And then you add up free agency, the top 3 picks, 2 of which are offensive linemen. One of them is Genty. Then people might go, well, okay, like Jahmyr Gibbs got picked really high and he became the engine of the offense. Like I can see it, but people aren't going to say that until you at least get through the second round, if not the third or later. Because I just don't think there's enough free agency dollars to make that happen. You can't go buy 5 guys in free agency. So we'll see what happens. I'm not saying that's the pick. I'm saying it could happen, but it would need, I believe, just like you do, multiple other things to happen, both in free agency and the draft, to make that a viable strategy.
I love this comment that the same guy that asked the question put in is, if the Bears draft Genty, I'm buying a jersey and also having a nervous breakdown until round 2 at the same time.
Yeah, and that's absolutely going to be the thing. Everybody's going to be waiting with bated breath to go, you're not done, right, Ryan? Yeah. Right? You're not done yet. So we'll see how that goes. I don't know that will be the pick again, but I don't know that it won't either. We'll see. It's going to be a fascinating draft. Bears are a really interesting spot at 10. Historically, when the Bears have been at 9 or 10, great players have been picked right before them. Cough, cough. One of the best defensive linemen of all time. Cough, cough. Leonard Williams. Happened 2 years in a row. Not great. So we've all got a little bit of an itch about that, but want to thank everybody for showing up tonight. We said we are going to be on for 90 minutes. We're about 90 minutes in. Again, remind your friends to sign up, to subscribe to Bear Era. We are going to be not super regular in the period when these come out. Again, when enough news builds up and we've got good things to tell you, or some news to break, or some insight to drop on the draft, or something that happened in the combine, we'll do it. We will give you some notice, let you know. If you're subscribed, you'll see those notifications pop up as well, so you won't miss it. We will run these as Q&As. We'll, sort of break our news in the beginning like we did at this point. Let us know what you want us to be talking about. Let us know whether this is too long, too short, often enough, not often enough. We can certainly up the period. We are independent and have flexibility because of that, which is awesome. So we want to use that to certainly our best ability to make good content, but a lot of that has to do with you and consuming it. So let us know in the comments, let us know on social media, follow the team, follow us, and subscribe. And we will see you fairly soon for another one of these, because it's just going to pick up steam from here. I leave basically a week, 9 days from now. I leave for the combine. I'll be there for 9 days. And then after that, the treadmill is in full stride. We're going to be cranking that dial up to 9 or 10. So we will have news all the way along. But thanks to everybody that showed up, had questions. Really enjoy it. So Ciaran, any final thoughts?
Yeah, it was this week and next week have kind of been the dead weeks for the offseason for the Bears, because the combine is really interesting in terms of just kind of learning about some of these guys that, look, we all know about the top prospects. We know that the guys that are projected very early, but it's the first time a lot of fans get the insights into some of the guys that may have been maybe the last couple of names that got invited, or guys that maybe didn't get invited, and you get to hear about them. You get to see, I like to see guys that are actually being kind of put into maybe brackets of a different position mold of how can they move in a certain way. I like that sort of stuff. But the most important thing for these coaches and for the GMs is actually going to be a lot of the medicals for some of these guys. Like,
For sure.
one of the things I'm looking forward to hearing is, how is Josh Simmons? How is that leg? Like, how is his recovery going? Because that is a big thing, because if his recovery is going, he's likely going to be kind of fighting off with Will Campbell to be one of the top offensive linemen taken. The problem is we don't know where his medicals are. Now, I don't know if the Bears would make that decision because of where they've been hit before, but another team will, because he's that talented. And there's going to be guys like that. The other thing that I'm just hoping for is that in the combine, nobody gets a serious injury, because it happens.
It's the worst. It happens every year. No, it happens every year. Or pro days. I mean, we saw it happen at the Michigan Pro Day a couple of years ago, and it's an unfortunate factor. And even rookie mini camps and OTAs, guys get out for the first time in months, and somebody goes down in a non-contact situation, and it's kind of the worst time, because they're not going to be back before the end of the season. They're going to miss the whole year, and it's just crap timing. But it does happen. It's a year-round sport for training, and it's super unfortunate.
I just hope that if there's injuries to some of the guys, that it's literally like, I don't know, like a minor pulled hamstring or something, and not something where they've torn their ACL, because we've seen that happen before at the combine. And for something that a lot of these teams aren't taking loads from the actual drills and really are honing in on the medical, honing in on the interviews and meeting these guys, you just hope for the best for some of these guys coming out. But then obviously it kind of, the other important element is the combine is kind of like the unofficial start of free agency, because that's
it is the official start.
Yeah.
That is the one thing I learned in going last year, because the first year I'd gone, is that the combine has nothing to do with the drills. It has a lot to do with the medicals for the players. It has some to do with the interviews, but again, interviews are now able to be conducted at All-Star games. So a lot of these guys have already had the bulk of their interviews, because they're trying to knock that off, because otherwise it's just a hellish week. You're going from early to late, and your sleep schedule's all screwed up, and that's obviously not great for athletic performance. A lot of these guys are taking advantage of those early interviews and getting the majority of them done. So they only have a handful. They have 5 or 10 left tops, and then they can really just concentrate on the on-field stuff. But the entire league is in Indianapolis, and like most people leave before the drills start. Like Indianapolis empties out when the drills start. The 4 days before that, everybody's there. Every bar's full. Every agent's there. Everybody, every coach looking for work is there. There is so much information trading, and all of these calls that you see on Hard Knocks during the draft, right? Where somebody calls up and goes, "Hey man, 2 for 9. Are we doing this? That thing we talked about?" Yeah. That thing we talked about is literally like Joe Shane and Goody were standing at midfield in the Shrine Bowl watching offensive line drills. And you're like, they're talking. And you're like, what are they talking about? They are talking about the thing that they're going to talk about in Indy, and basically shake hands on and say, if I call you when I'm on the clock, this is what it's going to cost. Because that doesn't get worked out in milliseconds during the draft. It starts on the All-Star game circuit, on the scouting circuit, at pro days. And by the time Indy comes around, a lot of people are shaking hands, whether it's, agents for free agents, or whether it's coaches and GMs saying, all right, what would it cost if we were interested in doing X, Y, or Z? And that is everywhere in Indianapolis. Like, you cannot look to the corner of a bagel shop and not go, who's that? Like, who are they representing? Oh, interesting. I guess X is interested in Y. All right, cool.
Yeah, like, to give a little insight as well, just from last year, I remember talking to a couple of people that were at the combine. One was a Giants reporter, another one was more on the national side, and it was the first time hearing that both the Bears and the Eagles were interested in Saquon Barkley. So those conversations initially happen. You will hear rumors of different teams interested in guys like Zach Martin, Trey Smith, like all these potential free agents. You'll hear little things of guys that might be interested. We'll probably find out more of who teams think will make it to free agency, because these guys and
in
their agents
actuality,
are
right.
actually saying it at this point. So really, that's when the news cycle gets into gear. In
Yep.
terms of for the podcast or even these live shows, obviously when that first wave of free agency hits and if the Bears make a big move, we'll be here to talk through it, especially if we said this probably in our first ever episode. If Trey Smith becomes a Bear, there's a special episode for Trey
Yep,
Smith.
100%.
So that will be happening, hopefully. But yeah, look, it's going to be a fun time. Combine is where this really gets into gear, and then it's just craziness until the draft ends. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be, despite we won't be doing a live stream or a podcast every week, but it might get close to that point when all the news cycle starts getting into high gear, because you have that free agency period, and then it's just the draft and seeing kind of as yourself, you'll be going to certain pro days, you're going to the combine, starting to learn more about these prospects, and then as we get close to the draft, we'll have different people on the show that will be able to, guys that all of you would listen to when it comes to their analysis on the draft. Will be aiming to get different guys on this so that you guys can ask questions about the different prospects that you're interested in, because there's been some great questions today. And like EJ said, tell your friends about the show. Make sure that you do like, subscribe, follow us all over on social media as well. You can find all of those in the description. And yeah, that's pretty much it for today. It's been fun. Lots of news that we had to get through because craziness has happened while you and me have been dealing with whatever illnesses people have killed us with. So as I said on social media recently, the day that Ben Johnson got hired as the Bears is the day I got the norovirus from my son. So I've been out of the action for 3.5 weeks, but it is good to be able to be back, to be able to talk about the Bears, and to be able to talk about some kind of something to look forward to, and really going into the name of this podcast, that this will be a new era for the Bears, and hopefully it'll be a very successful one.
Yeah. Happy to see that happening and on the horizon, and happy to see all of you as well. We will see you all again very soon. Thanks for showing up tonight. We really appreciate it.
Nice. So that is done on